Thanks everyone for coming along to the fourth of this year's Fireside Talks. This evening, our speaker is Matthew Warwick. Matthew is the Education Officer with the Ulster-Scots Community Network and an ardent proponent of all aspects of the Ulster-Scots tradition. He was born into a family who naturally converse in Braid Scotch in rural County Antrim. Because of that, Matthew has been immersed in the Hamley tongue from an early age. And I admit that sounds strange with me trying to pronounce it, but we know that Matthew will set me right if I get anything wrong. As a result of his upbringing, he has developed a passion for Ulster-Scots literature and poetry. From the work of the County Antrim rhyming weavers like James Orr and Samuel Thompson, to the country rhymes of Alex McAllister and John Clifford, and everything else in between. So this evening, to talk about the Ulster-Scots dimension in Sam Henry's Songs of the People, here is Matthew Warwick. Matthew, thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to try and share my screen here. Let me see. Okay, Nick, can you maybe give me a thumbs up? Can everybody see the appropriate slide? Okay, good evening. My name's Matthew Warwick, and thank you to Nick for the invitation and for that wonderful introduction. Education Officer sounds a very grand title. I'm really an escaped primary school teacher who managed to flee the classroom some 15 years ago, and I've been privileged and honoured to be able to talk about all things Ulster-Scots since that time. So I talked to Williams. I don't know if that's going to help me tonight or not, but I'm going to try and share a few thoughts on the Sam Henry collection and some of the Ulster-Scots content in there. Now, I got to see Granya's fantastic presentation from last week, and it was a cornucopia of multimedia, of video and song and everything else. I hope you're not too disappointed with my poultry offering this evening. But I have a few things we want to look at, and of course I'm not going to sort of reinvent the wheel, shall we say. I'm not going to do much of a disposition on who Sam Henry was and his life and times. I'm going to concentrate on some of the material that interests me from Songs of the People. So it's a huge collection, and we see from these images here, there were manuscripts, music manuscripts. We know that Sam, when he was traveling around, took his trusty tin whistle with him. I have mine here. Unfortunately, Nick and I road tested earlier, trying to play some of the airs of the tunes, and Zoom's set up for voice only. It doesn't like listening to the music, so you've maybe got a reprieve there. But he carried his whistle about, always willing to try and transcribe a local air or a tune that somebody shared with them. So an awful lot of handwritten manuscripts are in the collection, along with the sulfatonic notation, something I wish I was able to read. But the collection, 800 to 1,000 songs, is full of some wonderful nuggets and treasures. We have a vast array of Ulster-Scots published literature here, dating back to a collection that was first published in 1753, called the Ulster Miscellany. And at the back of that, there are, I think, is it 7 or 9 poems listed as being Scotch poems. We think that are by William Starrett, who was a school teacher from Strabane. And Starrett's an interesting character. He was a correspondent of the Scots language poet Alan Ramsay, one of Robert Burns's biggest influences. But it's interesting to note that this Scots language poetry being produced here in Ulster and put out for public consumption. This was first produced 6 years before Robbie Burns was a twinkle in his daddy's eye. So often a lot of Ulster-Scots poetry and literature is sometimes dismissed as being poor imitation of Burns, but no, it has been here before that. And it's hard to date a lot of the stuff in the Sam Henry collection, because you have that lovely oral tradition taken down from such and such, who learned it at his father's knee some 80 years ago or whatever, and dear knows where the father picked it up. I love that sort of oral folklore and this idea of these things being orally transmitted, not due to print. What's interesting to me about the whole collection is that these are notations of oral performances by people at their hearthside, in their cottage, or sitting outside on a wall, or leaning against a gate, that sort of country scene. And I'm often guilty as a country boy of putting everything in a sort of rural idyll in my mind. But whenever you look at the contributors to the collection, an awful lot of them were from urban Coleraine, Limavady, so larger towns, and not always in the green fields of the countryside, sometimes within the terraced houses of the streets. And that's important too, because it shows that this tradition of song was important right across society. And although there are some poems, I'll keep calling them poems tonight because I'm not for singing any of these to you. Nobody wants to hear my singing, but they're songs. And these songs, there are some famous songs in it. There are some of Robert Burns's collections. There's one that Sam, one that's called The Barnyards of Dalgetty, or Linton Lowry, as it's known in the collection. He took down from his mother singing, so it's something from his youth that he remembers his mother singing. But these were songs that were not from publications that were broadsides or whatever being sold and distributed. These were from people's memory and from their folk custom. So there's some of the material in them is a little bit more earthy and a little bit more, a good Ulster word is curse, I suppose. Maybe things that maybe in polite Victorian society wouldn't have been committed to print. But Sam Henry was happy enough at the start of the 20th century to notate these and collect them for posterity. So we're going to dive straight in and we're going to look at some of them. So I have a few lovely images here that were supplied by Joanne Honeyford at Causeway Coast and Glens Museum Services. Thanks to Joanne for that. So as you can see, 8th of March 1927 was when this went out in Songs of the People, serialised in the Northern Constitution in the newspaper. Note it from John Parker, who went by Dan Duffy, sort of correspondent, and the air was taken down by A.E. Boyd and Willie Reeds of Mayochel Garva, which I think is not sort of far from Moneydig, that sort of area outside Garva. So even in the way it's notated, it's second and third hand. It has went through a few different people to get to Sam Henry. So the old man and the churn staff. Oh, there was an old woman in her tune, and her tune did well. She loved her husband dearly, and another man twice as well. When Marie Furadi, boys, when Marie Furadi ran, when Marie Furadi, may she whack for old Adan. So I'm going to leave out those sort of repeated nonsense choruses, if you like, in the Lilton. She went into the doctor's shop some medicine to find, saying, "Have ye ony medicine would knock an old man blind?" The doctor gave her marrow bones and better grind them fine and dust them in the old man's eyes, and that would knock him blind. And then we have what's not uncommon of the time. There is a spoken interlude between a sort of a side narration to the songs. So the old man decided to drown himself, and the old wife agreed to aid and abet him. They went to the river, and she was set to push him in. And then the song continues. The old wife took a running race to shove the old man in, but the canny old boy stepped aside and she went burling in. Sometimes she sank, sometimes she swam till she came to the river's brim. But the old boy with the churn staff, he burled her farther in. Oh, when he thought she'd got enough, he pulled her to dry land, saying, "I think the notion's out of your head, oh him, another man." So a simple wee comic song with the lilting in between. You can imagine this social mirth, a bit of crack around a fire, helium round the houses as people used to do for entertainment. So some nice, simple, very organic, natural Ulster-Scots in there. So some interesting words that we have. We have burling, burl for a spin. Scots word for spin. It's also a movement in the bagpipes. A burl makes a sort of bubbling noise. And canny, a canny old boy, so canny being sort of wise, sensible, just not rushing into things. And it's out of your head and O'Hay and another man. And it's nice to see these things recorded as they were sang. And Sam Henry obviously was very, very aware that he did not have to correct the spelling of these songs. He transcribed them, or other people did it for him, as they were sang. And that gives us an authentic voice to listen back, although there's not recordings, an authentic voice to hear and imagine how these would be performed. So here's another one from John Henry Macaulay of Ballycastle and County Antrim. John Henry Macaulay contributed some 21 songs to the series, to the collected songs. So another light touch. My father would hae me to marry the miller. My mother would hae me to marry the laird, but bravely I ken it's the love of the cellar that brightens their fancy to ony regard. The miller is cricket, the miller is crabbit, the laird, though he's wealthy, is lazy and lean. He's old and he's cold, he's blind and he's bald, for he's no for a lassie, oh, merry 18. But I hae a laddie wha tells me he loves me, and him I loe dearly, as dear as my life. Should father and mother scold and abuse me, nae other will ever get me for a wife. Although he can't boast either land or yet cellar, he's worthy to match with a duchess or queen, for his heart is so warm and so stately his form, and he like mysel is just merry 18. So, is this an original composition from John Henry Macaulay? There's a very good chance of it. And you can see there the Old Lammas Fair, one of his original songs that was printed for distribution and would have been known at the day. And again, we have some of that lovely organic Ulster-Scots in there. So laird for lord, bravely, there is that beautiful Ulster-Scots word of brave, or bravely. It's a brave day the day. It's a fine day the day, or your man's brave and thran. You can use it as an adverb, a sort of intensifier. So, so bravely I ken, bravely I know, it's for the love of silver. The miller is crabbit. So here we have crabbit, a sort of a local variation of it. I remember from one of the late Seamus Heaney's last poems called "A Bird for Burns" that he produced for the 2009, what is it, the 250th anniversary of Robbie Burns's birth. There's a line in it where Seamus Heaney refers to his neighbours being crabbit, but he sort of had a quandary on how to spell it as well. He did it C-R-A-B-B-E-D with an acute accent over the E to sort of the crabbed instead of just crabbed. But crabbit would be the sort of Ulster-Scots standard there. And he's no for a lassie of merry 18 throughout. And I'm just going to show you my copy of Songs of the People here. Okay, so hopefully the camera picks up. Do you see all these wee tabs at the side? Those are all songs that I had a wee skelly at that contained considerable amounts of Ulster-Scots vocabulary. So there's just under 100 there whenever I went through it. And some are light touch and some are much more intense, and we'll have a wee look at those. And the Ulster-Scots in it is very good. And this was long before there was any of our Ulster-Scots dictionaries. So we have from James Fenton, who was from Ballinalub, sort of between Dunloy and Cloughmills and County Antrim, the Hamley tongue, a personal record of Ulster-Scots in County Antrim. We also have the concise Ulster Dictionary, which contains all sorts of local vernacular and colloquial speech found in Ulster right across 9 counties, but there's a sizable amount of that is Scotch. And then, of course, we have the concise Scots Dictionary. And if you can see the size of it, it's not that concise. It's a massive document. But it's amazing how many of the spellings within the Sam Henry collection conform to the standards of spelling for Ulster-Scots and Scots, but they predate it, most of those volumes. So people were well read in the likes of Burns, and there were lots of people writing in Ulster-Scots. For instance, like Songs of the People appeared in the Northern Constitution just slightly before Sam Henry's time. John McFall would have contributed a column in the Northern Constitution, and it was written in the braid Ulster-Scots tongue of Northampton. So people were used to reading Ulster-Scots in the sort of local vernacular much more then than they are now. But what I can see from looking at Songs of the People, that Sam Henry was very, very aware and conformed, and the spelling is excellent. Right, here's another poem, and this is John Blunt. So you can see at the top it says, "From Tom Black of Crochan." So Crochan is one of the hills at the edge of the Antrim Glens there, or the Antrim Plateau, not far from Knocklade. So from Tom Black of Crochan, now in his 89th year, who learnt it sitting on his father's knee. So this is transcribed, I think, sometime in the early 1920s. So a man that's nearly 90 going back to his childhood, that's a long time. So we're going to have a wee go looking at this. And again, it's a boisterous, upbeat song to amuse sort of company. So let's have a go. An old man lived at the foot of a hill, John Blunt it was his name. He sold beer and good strong ale, and he bore a wondrous frame. I'll leave out the lilting. The Michaelmas one that blew very keen, that blew up in John Blunt's door. And co the good man to his good queen, get up and bar the door. My hand is in my hose, John Blunt, and my hose they dinna go free. For if it stands unbarred till I bar it, it'll stand till the day I die. These twa couple, they made a bargain. They made it be firm and sure. The very first yin that would speak the word would get up and bar the door. There were three travellers three, was travelling o'er the moor, and by the light of John Blunt's house, they all walked in at the door. First they bid good e'en upon them, and syne they bid good morrow. But damn a word the old couple spoke, for fear they would bar the door o. First they ate the white puddings, and syne they ate the black yins, and aye the old man said unto his cell, the devil trank hour with that yin. They took the old man out of the neuk, they shaved his beard fu clean o, and they said the yin unto the other, we'll kiss the old wife Gino. They took the old wife out of the neuk, and they laid her on the floor o. And here's the bit you can't see. You hae ate of my mate, and drank of my drink, and you're making my wife a hurro. Imagine. And if you can look, turn your head to the side, here's the punchline. Aha, John Blunt, you hae spoke the first word. Get up and bar the door. So quite a dark black humour of the time. Definitely wouldn't have been committed to print for fear of offending sort of Victorian sensitivities and everything else. But it's that sort of body barroom humour that people would have had a bit of a chuckle about, and we do have a dark, a black humour here in Northern Ireland to this day. So essentially, you can eat all my food, you've drunk all my drink, you've shaven my beard, and you're about to assault my wife. But what's the most important thing? The wife has won the vet, because John Blunt has got up and spoke, and she's happy about the circumstance because she wins, and she doesn't have to bar the door. So a great Ulster-Scots word is thran, and I think this sort of describes the thranness of the local population. Some great vocabulary in there, and quo, so and said the good man, and good man, and good wife, and good queen, sort of husband and wife. My hand is in my hose. So socks, she's rubbing her legs, or either that, she's darning her socks or mending them, and she's busy concentrating, and she doesn't want to set it down. So that's why she's not going to get up and bar the door, and then the bet is made. So good evening upon them, good morrow, good day, sign, again, auld lang syne. and afterwards and since. So it also tells us of the eating habits of the people: white puddings and black puddings. Wine fond a wee bit of black pudding myself. The devil clink hour with that yin. So, and I, the old man, and always the old man said unto himself, the devil clink hour with that yin. So the devil can take that boy away. So, and then they took the old man out of the nuke. The last time I was up at the Giant's Causeway. I think there's a pub at the entrance to the Giant's Causeway, and it's called the Nook. But I always thought it should be renamed the Nuke, because there's a wee nuke somewhere. It's a nice, lovely Ulster-Scots word, colloquial word describing a corner. And the rest, as they say, is that. So you can see a picture of Tom Black, the fiddler of Croghan. This is and we if you've seen any of the other presentations, Sam Henry was an avid photographer. So here we have this fine picture of Tom Black of Croghan, the fiddler, with his fiddle, and what looks like is not unlike a sort of Davy Crockett raccoon skin hat. What a picture! A picture tells a thousand words. So there's all variety of songs within Sam Henry's collection, and at the very start, sorry, did I skip two there? Yeah, at the very start of the book. Now, the book was put together, edited and transcribed and revised Gail Huntington and Lanny Herman with the help of Dr. Molden. And they put them into different categories, and they called each of the 25 chapters, if you like, from a line of one of the poems. And one of the first, if I can get my things in the right order, one of the A2, one of the first chapters is called Rock on the Cradle is Nae Work Ava. And it's about lullabies, and it's about sort of wee songs for weans or children. So this one here, My Dog's Dead, the title is in standard English, but it's not that in the song, it's My Dog's Dead. So from Mrs. Brownlow, Ballylagan, Cloyfan, Coleraine, and the Brownlow family contributed quite a bit of material to Sam Henry's collection. So if you can picture the scene, a mother or a grandmother or any sort of parent or an aunt or whoever has a wee wean nursing them on their knee and singing them a wee song to entertain them. And at the end, each time it mentions a different body part. So you can imagine them pinching the body part and then completing the end of the song. So as you can see down at the bottom, it's in the key of G. I don't know if any of you read Stolfatonic. I don't, so I'm just going to read it again. My dog's deed na dult awa. What will a day with the skin that's on his nose? I'll gie it to my wee sonny to mark a pair of shoes. My dog's deed na dult awa. What will a day with the skin that's on his lugs? I'll gie them to my wee sonny to mark a pair of togs. My dog's deed na dult awa. What will a day with the skin on his back? I'll gie it to my wee sonny for to mark a peddler's pack. My dog's deed na dult awa. What will a day with the skin that's o' his tail? I'll gie it to my wee sonny for to mark a supple for his flail. My dog's deed na dult awa. What will a day with the skin that's on his legs? I'll gie it to my wee sonny for to mark a pair of pegs. So imagine there would have been a nice wee simple tune that the child could have joined in with, and each time there would be like this little piggy went to market, they would grab the appropriate point, and you can imagine the giggles and the cackling. So that's sort of a bonding song between an adult and a child. I thought that was really, really nice. I thought it was slightly sinister, all the same, that the dog has died, what we're going to do with his body parts. But anyway, what can we say? We're a canny bunch, Ulster-Scots, reduce, reuse, recycle. Moving on. So, again, another tune I called the Piper and the Fairies from the collection. I think this could be another John Henry Macaulay. I'm not quite sure. my notes. Anyway, the farther in, the deeper. My cabin, the piper lay asleep beside a havel of hay, and maybe he shouldn't hae dip it sae deep in the potching that August day. 'Twas the finish up o' a causeway fair that all the world had attended. Maist folk for the piper had a copper to spare that wouldna hate in his pouch till he'd spend it. As at dusk as he lay at the heathlands then, a muddled and sleep and dreaming, hurrying and scurrying up the Erd glen, came trips of the wee folk streaming, led by a hurtling old humpy thing that kept laughing and skirling and squealing, and around the piper they made a ring, whirling and louping and wheeling, dancing and prancing around in a drove, the biggest and benweed riding, till they whip at the piper awa to their cove, where they keep him still abiding. And old folks say that night and day is well guarded by a keeper. For 100 years he got to play, the farther in the deeper. And as long as the old piper, the folk declare, where the fairies be's a staying, and market or fair, and my cabin will be there to keep the pipes a playing. And in harvest fields is heard a soon, neath the feet of the startled reaper, the old piper playing his skirling tune, the farther in, the deeper. And to use an appropriate Ulster-Scots adjective, I think that's a whaker. I talked a wee bit earlier on about lullabies, and that title of Rock in the Cradle is nae work of ah. So I'll give you a wee bit of that. So part of it is sort of Rockabye Baby on the Treetop, but it's a sort of local variation to it. And this is how it goes. When I was young, I was airy and handsome, and my delight was in fiddling and dancing. Now I am old, and my joints are grown feeble, fitting for Nathan, but rocking the cradle and singing he's ba. Rocking the cradle is nae work of ah. I'll set my cradle on yon hill top, and when the wind blows, the cradle will rock, and when the wind stops, the cradle will fa. Down comes the cradle, wee Bobby, and awe. And again, that was collected from Mrs. Brownlow of Cloyfin. So rocking the cradle is nae work of ah, is no work at all. Of ah is a sort at all. And rocking the cradle and singing he's ba. To be honest, I had to look that up. And in the concise Scottish dictionary, he's ba seems to be just like nearly like a howler wheesht wean. It's a sort of phrase that people would say to a baby to comfort it if it was crying. He's ba. And it's an old Scots thing. So it's lovely to see that it was still in use. To be honest, I hadn't encountered it until I read it in that little lullaby. So as I say, there's so much richness of vocabulary throughout these wee songs. Now, a wee bit of background. So if we think of this map, hope you can all see it. So Ulster-Scots, the sort of seminal work and research in Ulster-Scots was done by Professor Robert Gregg, or Bob Gregg of Larne, in the late 50s and 1960s. And he was a proper linguist and went in, and he went round and met people in different areas and collected their vocabulary and their pronunciations. And I'm not a linguist, I'm an enthusiast in the language. But this is his map that he produced at the time of the 3 dialectal regions of Ulster-Scots. So you can see down here around the north of the Ards Peninsula, you've got the southern County Down one. So sort of stretching from Port of Ogie all the way up round sort of to Newton Ards, and then probably down as far as Ballynahinch and across to Killalay. Then, of course, the central region here, so Antrim and Coleraine. So more or less stretching from Island Magee all the way across to Ralstown, all the way up probably Ballymoney, across Garva, and all the way more or less to Limavady, and round McGilligan and round the north coast. Now, bizarrely for me, he has left out the glens here, and even today, some of the best natural organic Ulster Scots that you will hear in everyday conversation will be, in Cushendon and Cushendall and round the coast of Ballycastle. I think this was Professor Robert Gregg given that as due as being the sort of Antrim Gaeltacht area, and that he didn't want to stand on toes. But of course, it's an area that is immersed with a Scottish tradition as well, because its proximity to the Mull of Kintyre and the McDonald's coming over the Lords of the Isles in 1399 and all the interaction that there has been. But if you think of the correspondence and the people that Sam Henry collected his songs from, it really does fall quite nicely into this region. So I've got this here, this 1830s Ordnance Survey Memoirs. So this is from Achonloo, County Londonderry, just slightly north of Limavady. And remember, the Ordnance Survey Memoirs were updated largely by sort of retired military officers mostly from England, and maybe were a few Scotsmen in it. But I don't think this was a Scotsman that took this note when he visited Achonloo. The local customs are those most prevalent among all the Scottish inhabitants of the country. Dancing is a favourite amusement. They seem to be very fond of fiddle playing. Singing schools are held in rotation among the Presbyterian farmers' houses, and after music, both sacred and profane, a dance generally concludes. Now, this isn't limited to Achonloo. County Antrim, and particularly the south of County Antrim, places like Carnmoney and around sort of 6 Mile Water Valley, these sentiments are echoed over and over again. But I'm going to do another song here from the collection, and it's called Matty Brown's Sue. So it was put out in the Constitution on the 3rd of October 1936, and the source was a James Bond from Termaquin. I hope I'm saying that right, Limavady. Now, I don't think it was 007, but I had a wee look then on the 1911 census, and I found a sheet for a James Bond at Termaquin, who's the head of the family. In 1911, he was 42, he was a Presbyterian, he could read and write, and he was a farm labourer. So you think another 25 years later, if this song had been collected around the time of publication, James Bond certainly would have been of a pensionable age, and Sam Henry would have had cause to visit him and to interview him and everything else as part of his work. So the notes for this, it says, it's an old-time comic song with patter. It is not so much a tune as a musical monologue. The song would seem to indicate that the settlers around Termaquin, Terry-Doo, and Drumramer came originally from the Loch Ryan district. So I'm going to have a go at Matty Brown's Sue for you now. You'll have to bear with me. And I couldn't find the lyrics of this song printed anywhere else on the internet, and looking at different Scottish sites and things like that. I did come across some recordings of it from the 1940s and 50s from Orkney, and it was a slightly different version. So it seems to be a very, very old Scots language song or performance piece that has, hold on, sorry, that has sort of disappeared. Why am I thinking of this? Well, somebody has learned this. James Bond has learned this by word of mouth. Somebody has taught him the song or has performed the song, or maybe, as was the custom, he's a farm labourer. Maybe he was still at that time. People would have went over to what they called lifting the Scotch, so going over to help with the Scotch harvest. Be it the oats, be it the flax, be it the corn, barley, whatever, potatoes, usually about a month before the harvest would have been brought in here. And there was this always coming and going, this streaming two-way traffic of migrant itinerant farm labourers. So possibly, who knows, James Bond may have picked this up on the other side of the Shach, or maybe it was just from some traveller coming through the district. But it's a really, really interesting one. So I hope after that big build-up I can do this justice, because it's quite dense in its Scots. Conel, my wife, the other night, provision it is cheap, man, and for the trifle it mich tak, a sue we mich well keep, man. Indeed, co I, my dearest Nell, I hae been thinking say mysel, and since it's new my notion, I'll just go down to Matty Bryn this afternoon, and very soon I'll hae him on a rope, man. And when I entered Matty's door, she blithely met me on the floor. Questions speared me, half a score, some jokes befell, I cannae tell. My heron there, scant man. And then there's one of these spoken interludes. Well, you may ken Matty and me was old sweethearts at the time, but love just operates on me like medicine in an old wifey's stomach. Then the song continues. Run about old Grumpy's legs, the rope I quickly tied, man, wi' a supple birchen twig, a driver frae the sty, man. She might go east, I might go west, and ony road she liked the best. At last she had my brain distressed. I poked her neath and kicked her baith, and made her squeal a loud, man. And then another spoken interlude. Well, I think I had managed her if it hadn't been for a big stain that was in the dike shaft that took my toe and awa went my length and breadth in the glaar. Snap went the rate, and awa she went, and I never saw sichter mare. Never saw sichter mare. And then there's a wee concluding chorus. But while there's heron and Loch Ryan, I'll ne'er want kitchen when I dine. A bid adieu to pig and swine, and Matty and her Sue man. So while there's heron and Loch Ryan, I'll ne'er want kitchen when I dine. Kitchen, there's an old saying, salty salt's nae kitchen. Adding salt to more salt is not cooking. So kitchen sort of means cooking there, cuisine. I'll bid adieu to pig and swine and Matty and her Sue man. Just a wee comical rhyme song. Not prolific. I haven't encountered it in any other volume, but it's amazing that that has went all the way up to Orkney and Shetland. Did it originate there? Did it originate around the Loch Ryan parts? Who knows? It would be interesting to maybe do some genealogical research on the people of around that area, as Sam puts in his little notes. But that is why this collection is so important. Folks, I'm conscious that I have rannered on for a wee while. I could talk all day. I hope you haven't been let down too much by the lack of singing. I just want to finish with one. There's a wee section at the start I thought was very, very jovial at the very start of the collection. And it's, come, let us all begin old choir rhymes. So Henry had collected a few old choir rhymes, I think chiefly from around Ballywillan and Portrush. And back in the day, before every church had an organ, a lot of the Presbyterian congregations would have had a precentor with a tuning fork, and they would have sang nothing but the old 4-part metric psalms. And still some congregations keep to that tradition to this day. However, in the notes, seems a lot of these were taken from a book that was given to Sam Henry that was by a man called William Robb, and it was given to him by somebody called Hugh Eccles, Esquire JP. And it says on the book was begun on Sunday between 12 and 1 o'clock, March the 30th day, 1729, the Dominical letter A, the golden number 1, the E-pact 11, and this cycle of the sun 10, and the moon's age in the 12th day, and the tide was going in at Loch Foyle, and yonder the planet Jupiter. So it shows us that it's a wee bit of fun and they're not taking it too seriously. And I don't think it dates to 1729. That's all very tongue-in-cheek. But what it has is an awful lot of wee rhymes that would accompany the meter of the psalms or the tunes. And I think the concept behind this was that at choir practices, it wasn't maybe always seemed to be the done thing to recite the psalms, especially if you were just practicing the singing and the harmonies and everything else. So rather than butcher them at the start, they would have invented wee rhymes to get them past. And there's one here for the tune Newton, being in the key of F. So, O Newton, you are hard to sing, beeth ill to time and place. Your 3 high fas, strain a my jaws, and wrinkle a my face. And there's 3 high Fs, 3 high fas on it. So, you know, even the rhyme in Ulster-Scots, it makes a joke out of the musical notation. So that gives a sort of an idea of some of the breadth of material. If you haven't got a copy of Sam Henry's Songs of the People. If you have a good hook through, another good Ulster-Scots word, any of the second-hand bookshops in your areas, you might catch them. I was able to source mine online for not too much. It's a very sizable volume and it's well worth the read. And again, I'm only scraping the surface there of material. So that's some of the Ulster-Scots language stuff. There's lots of stuff relating to Ulster-Scots sort of themes, subject matter. So the movement of people, of harvests, of interaction between churches and congregations. There's all sorts of human material there that is relative to the story. So, Nick, I shall howl my wheest and pass over to you, if that's okay, for questions.
That's perfect, Matthew. Thank you so much. Did you want to stop sharing your screen?
Oh, yes, sorry.
The recording.